Okay, I was just watching the first ever episode of Love Thy Neighbour. It came up on my timeline. So I thought, okay, I may as well just watch this because I'd been familiar with the show, but I'd never actually seen it in full. So basically, Love Thy Neighbour was a Thames television production aired between, I think it was 1972 and 1976. And the basis of the comedy is exploring racism, basically, and bigotry and prejudice. Um, Chances are, if you're watching, well, I don't know if I'll put this in the title or not, but it stars Jack Smethurst as a working class socialist guy who has some very bigoted views. He plays Eddie Booth. Rudolph Walker stars as Bill Reynolds, who's his black neighbour, moves in. Nina Baden Semper as Barbie Reynolds, his wife, and Kate Williams as Joan Booth. And the two wives are kind of the facilitating players, at least in this first episode. I have to say, I found it very funny and very witty, and and as I expected, the humour seemed to have been misunderstood by people who would today say it's racist. But a lot of the comments underneath were saying, "Oh, millennials would have a meltdown over this." So I'd just like to make a point here. I'm a millennial, right? Technically, anyone born after roughly 1983 to 1999 is a millennial. Um, Not all of us are snowflakes, okay? Not all of us are overly sensitive to these things. And I think anyone really looking at that would say that the humour lies not in endorsing Eddie's bigotry, but in mocking it. And there's a funny line at the end of the episode, if you're familiar with the show, where he says, "No, sorry, honey, we can't do it. We've always been opposed to his kind. He's a bloody conservative." So that's the joke. Um, I think it's very true that that sort of comedy wouldn't survive today because the identity politics mob would immediately get in and say, "Oh, it's racist, it's promoting racism," because there is quite liberal use of racially derogatory terms. There's a very funny bit where Rudolph Walker's character comes out and he's kind of dressed like an African tribesman with a knife, and he's mocking his neighbour's perception of what he should be. I found that hilarious. So, whilst I would definitely agree that my generation is associated with this overt sensitivity, I would say it's not, firstly, it's not a unique province of my generation. I've seen some middle aged academics who would be baby boomers who are incredibly politically correct. So, it's something that's associated with this era and often associated with millennials because of things we hear about in university campuses. But I do get a little irritated when it's like, oh, millennials are all this. Not all millennials think like that. You know, you get conservative millennials, you get centrist millennials, and even centre left millennials who don't have that sort of mentality. So check out the episode. It's on YouTube, over 500,000 views. So it was clearly a popular show. There was even a film adaptation of it. And it's very obvious that the humour lies in mocking bigotry, not endorsing it. In fact, if anything, it could be described as very anti-racist. And that's the irony. I feel that today that if a white director made a production that was clearly attacking racism, and he had to use or she had to use um, racially derogatory terms to make the point, then the identity politics mob would be like, "Oh, it's racist." I mean, there is a totalitarianism to their thinking, and I have no respect for them. And the problem I have today is those sort of people are given platforms. I mean, that book, Why I No Longer Speak to White People About Race, the writer is in her 20s, you know, which is, I wonder how much real world experience she has. She studied at the London School of African and Oriental Studies. She's in her 20s and she's, you know, making money off this book that is the Reni Edo Lodge, I believe she's called. But, you know, even if she's personally experienced racism, to have this kind of blanket, why I don't speak to white people about race, I think the best way to challenge racism is to challenge it, challenge bigotry. Um, Now, having said that, that doesn't mean I absolutely endorse everything from the past. There are some things that clearly are dated. I mean, some of the one-liners in the Sean Connery era Bond, I can see would be a bit, out of place today. So I'm not against certain things adapting over time. I'm not against certain changes, or relook at certain things. But when something is so blatantly anti-racist, that's it's a pity that others, overly sensitive people, identity politics types, will just immediately jump on the attack without really looking at it. I do think that's a pity. Um, though I would suggest that we tend to associate, I would say there's certain things that actually are sanctioned today, I would argue are a lot more insensitive than some of the things of the past. An example being the late Jeremy Kyle show. That is far more destructive and insensitive and hurtful and bullying than some of the things that were around in the 70s. Then you still get shock jock comedians like Frankie Boyle and Boy Chubby Brown who are incredibly popular. But to me, that's a totally different kind of humor. It isn't clever. It's just vulgar and crude and hurtful for the sake of it. So anyway, I'll round this up. So yeah, I totally agree about sensitivity and political correctness. But don't associate with all millennials. We're not all oversensitive snowflakes who push identity politics. Point one. And point two, that having been said, I don't think there's anything wrong with certain things adapting over time. But we do need to look at things in context. And Love Thy Neighbour was clearly an anti racist program. I saw comments underneath saying, I'm black and I love this show. So, mind, I have only watched one episode, so I can't comment about the rest of the show, but that was the intro. Check it out. And yeah, if you're an older person, don't assume all millennials are like that because we're really not.